Probably Aristotle's biggest contribution to virtue ethics is the idea of vice and virtue and what is called the golden mean. A mean is the average, and so the golden mean is like sort of the golden average. And the idea is that virtue is the average between excess and deficiency. And anything that is excessive or deficient is a vice. The idea here is that you really need to avoid doing things excessively or not doing enough of them. You have to sort of steer this middle ground and get into what's called the golden mean. And the idea here is, we can go back to like our knife example. A knife's virtue is to be able to cut. But a knife that maybe is way too sharp may not be as virtuous as a knife that's adequately sharp. That might be hard to believe, but I would guess you could have a knife that's almost too sharp and almost too dangerous for a person. And that would become where it goes beyond being virtuous and becomes vice, because nobody expects it to be that sharp, and it has a tendency to cut you. But at the same time, a knife that lacks the virtue of sharpness is deficient in it. And so it has a vice that is a deficiency of virtue in the sharpness. But you can go into all kinds of things. Vice and virtue, deficiency, excess. Everything has its excesses and deficiencies. I talked about exercise. You can have an excess of exercise where you just work out all the time, and you can have a deficiency where you're lazy. But you can have excesses of virtue, which are things like being a good friend. But at the same time, if you're excessive in your being a good friend, you're just a yes man, and you don't give your friend real truth. You're just a yes man. You're a sycophant. But if you're deficient in it, then you're unloyal. And so loyalty is a virtue, but the lack of loyalty is disloyalty, and the excess of loyalty is sycophantism. And you don't want to be either of those. A person who tells the truth is virtuous, but a person who is too truthful is blunt and rude. But a person who lacks in truthfulness is dishonest. And so the goal here is to try to become the best you can be, the most virtuous, trying to gain towards never going too much or never going too little. And you're constantly striving to go back and forth. And that's why, for example, I say it's very conduct oriented, where, on a given day, maybe on certain days, you're saying, I need to do more of being good to my neighbor. And other days you're saying, I've been really too nice and I'm becoming a bit of a pushover. And so those days, you're maybe rude to people intentionally because you're trying to avoid the excess of niceness. And sometimes you are deficient in it, and so you need to be extra nice to people. And so the key is that there's always this effort to try to steer between the vices of deficiency and excess in order to reach the virtue.